The glass doors of Regency Timepieces swung open with a soft chime, barely audible over the hum of conversation and the subdued clinking of crystal glasses in the lounge area. The air inside was thick with the scent of polished mahogany and expensive cologne. Every surface gleamed, marble floors reflecting the glow of custom-designed chandeliers, glass display cases lined with watches that cost more than most people's homes. The kind of place where money wasn't just expected, it was demanded. A man stepped inside, his presence quiet yet oddly compelling. He wore a faded gray t-shirt, slightly wrinkled, and an old baseball cap pulled low over his face. His jeans, though clean, were worn at the seams, and his sneakers had seen better days. To the untrained eye, he looked like a tourist, someone out of place in this temple of exclusivity. Bradley Carter, one of the store's senior salesmen, noticed him immediately. From his position behind the main counter, he arched an eyebrow, his practiced smile faltering for just a second before he adjusted it back into place. He knew exactly what kind of people walked through these doors: hedge fund billionaires, Hollywood producers, foreign royalty. Not this. Not someone who looked like he had wandered in off the street. The man moved with a slow, deliberate grace, his hands resting casually in his pockets. His eyes, hidden beneath the brim of his cap, scanned the showroom, lingering briefly on the high-end models showcased under bulletproof glass. He stopped in front of the central display, where the most valuable pieces resided. Bradley sighed. Of course. Another dreamer. Another window shopper looking to entertain himself. He straightened his tie, rolling his shoulders as he walked over, his polished leather shoes clicking softly against the marble. With the ease of someone who had done this 1,000 times before, he stepped in front of the man, positioning himself between him and the most expensive watches in the store. "Can I help you?" His tone was polite, professional. But beneath the veneer of customer service, there was something else, something cold, dismissive. He had already decided this conversation wouldn't lead to a sale. The man lifted his head slightly, and for the first time, Bradley caught a glimpse of his face. Strong jawline. A hint of stubble. Eyes that, despite being shadowed, held an almost unsettling calm. "I'd like to see that one," the man said, pointing to a Patek Philippe Grandmaster chime, a watch so rare and exclusive that only a handful existed in the world. Price tag, $500,000. Bradley barely suppressed a laugh. His lips curled just slightly before he caught himself, shaking his head internally. He had seen this before, people wandering in, hoping to touch something they could never afford, to take a photo, maybe to pretend, just for a moment, that they belonged here. He glanced down at the man's clothes again. Faded, unimpressive. "I'm not sure that's the right model for you," Bradley said smoothly, offering the same condescending smile he reserved for those who had wandered too far above their tax bracket. "Perhaps I can show you something a little more suitable." The man didn't move. Didn't blink. "I want to see that one," he repeated, his voice unwavering. For the first time, Bradley felt something, a slight flicker of doubt, an unexplainable shift in the air between them. But he ignored it, his smirk deepening as he exhaled sharply through his nose. "That particular piece," he said, enunciating each word carefully, as if speaking to a child, "is an investment. A collector's item." "It's not exactly," he trailed off, letting his gaze flick down the man's attire once more. The man held his gaze. And then, slowly, deliberately, he said, "Do you always judge your customers this quickly?" Silence. For the first time that evening, Bradley hesitated. Bradley's smirk twitched, but he quickly masked it with a practiced laugh, one that was just a little too forced. He had spent years perfecting his ability to size up customers in an instant. And this one? This one didn't belong. "I'm just being honest," he said smoothly, tilting his head slightly. "A watch like this isn't for just anyone. It's for collectors, investors, people who understand its true value." His voice carried the subtle condescension of someone who had already decided the conversation was over. I could show you something more in line with. I asked about this one. The man's voice was quiet but firm, cutting through the air like a blade. He wasn't raising his tone. He wasn't getting angry. But there was something about the way he spoke, so calm, so sure, that made Bradley's fingers tighten slightly around his clipboard. The tension in the space between them shifted, an almost imperceptible change. Bradley suddenly became aware of the other customers in the store. A well-dressed couple had paused their conversation to glance over. An older man by the counter casually adjusted his cufflinks but kept his eyes locked on the interaction. Even some of the other sales associates were pretending to be busy, yet subtly watching. Bradley inhaled slowly through his nose, schooling his features into something resembling polite patience. This watch, he said, gesturing lazily at the display case, is a Patek Philippe Grandmaster chime. 18-karat white gold, reversible case, hand-engraved detailing. Limited to just 7 pieces worldwide. It's 3 of them are privately owned, 2 are in museums, and 1 was auctioned last year for nearly $3 million. Bradley's mouth shut. The man hadn't just read the price tag. He knew the watch. Knew it well. For the first time, Bradley took a fraction of a second too long to respond. The man's expression remained unreadable. I asked about the one in front of me. Are you going to show it to me, or not? The question was simple. Direct. But it wasn't really a question. It was a challenge. Bradley felt heat creep up his neck, an unfamiliar frustration bubbling under his skin. He had spent years dealing with entitled millionaires, egotistical billionaires, and collectors who thought they knew more than they did. He had mastered the art of dismissing those who weren't worth his time. But this man, there was something off about him. He didn't get defensive. He didn't act out. He simply waited, completely unshaken, like he already knew exactly how this was going to play out. Bradley's jaw clenched as he forced a laugh, shaking his head. Look, I'm just trying to save you some time, he said, crossing his arms. This piece. It's $500,000. That's 5 zeros after a 5. If you're just here to look. I didn't ask for financial advice. Bradley's mouth opened slightly, but no words came out. A beat of silence. Then the man took a slow step back, adjusting the worn-out baseball cap on his head. He exhaled softly, like he had given this conversation more time than it deserved. I see how this works, he murmured. He didn't sound angry. He didn't even sound surprised. If anything, there was a quiet disappointment in his tone, like he had expected this all along. And for some reason, that irritated Bradley more than if the guy had gotten mad. The man gave one last glance at the watch, just a flicker of a look, before he turned and started toward the door. Bradley watched him go, still holding on to the same smug confidence he had worn from the beginning. But then, from the other side of the store, someone whispered. Wait a second, isn't that? Another voice, this time louder. Holy shit. That's Keanu Reeves. And just like that, the room changed. Bradley felt the shift immediately. It was like the air had been sucked out of the room. The soft murmur of conversation among the customers turned into sharp whispers, gasps, and the faint sound of someone fumbling with their phone, probably to take a picture. A woman near the counter covered her mouth, her eyes widening in disbelief. Keanu Reeves. Bradley's stomach twisted. His pulse kicked up, and for the first time all evening, a cold sensation of unease settled in his chest. No. It couldn't be. He turned sharply, eyes locking onto the man now just steps from the door. Same calm stride. Same effortless presence. And now, with his head slightly tilted in response to the murmurs, the light hit his face differently. The strong jawline. The sharp cheekbones. The unmistakable eyes. Keanu fucking Reeves. A customer near the entrance whispered, not even trying to hide the excitement in her voice. Oh my God, that's really him. He's, like, the nicest guy in Hollywood. Another voice joined in, a man this time, shaking his head in disbelief. Dude, no way. How the hell did you not recognize Keanu Reeves? Bradley's breath hitched. He had recognized him. He had seen the man's face 100 times before, on movie posters, in interviews, on giant billboards just a few blocks away from this very store. But not here. Not like this. Keanu wasn't supposed to walk into a place like Regency Timepieces looking like that. He was supposed to have an entourage. A stylist. A damn assistant holding the door open for him. He wasn't supposed to show up in jeans and a baseball cap, blending in like some nobody. A tight, anxious lump formed in Bradley's throat. He had humiliated Keanu Reeves. Panic surged through him like an electric current, and before he could stop himself, his feet were moving. Mr. Reeves, wait. His voice rang out, too loud, too desperate, cutting through the murmurs like a blade. Every pair of eyes in the store snapped toward him as he practically lunged forward, nearly tripping over himself in his hurry to reach the door before Keanu could walk out. Keanu stopped. Slowly, he turned, his expression unreadable. Bradley swallowed hard. He was close enough now to see the disappointment lingering in the actor's dark eyes. Not anger. Not even irritation. Just that same quiet understanding, like he had seen this kind of thing before, like it wasn't surprising at all. That somehow made it worse. Bradley forced a smile, the corners of his mouth twitching. His voice came out strained, brittle. Mr. Reeves, he exhaled sharply, his mind racing. Fix this. Fix this now. I'm so sorry about the misunderstanding. If I had known. Keanu's eyes flicked over him, and for the first time, there was a subtle shift in his expression. Something sharp. Colder. If you had known, he repeated, voice low. Bradley stammered, his confidence crumbling. I didn't mean any disrespect, he forced out another laugh, desperate now. You know how it is, right? We have to be careful about who we let handle such high-value pieces. Keanu didn't move. Didn't blink. The pause stretched long enough that Bradley felt his palms begin to sweat. Then, finally, Keanu spoke. You need to know who someone is before you treat them with respect. His tone wasn't raised. Wasn't even accusatory. But there was weight behind it. Bradley felt his stomach drop. A fresh wave of murmurs spread through the store. The couple near the display case exchanged looks. One of the younger employees standing by the register turned slightly, his face an awkward mask of second-hand embarrassment. Bradley scrambled, grasping for anything to pull himself out of the sinking pit he had just created. And no, of course not, sir, I just. Keanu gave a slow nod, more to himself than anyone else. I see. He adjusted the cap on his head, then turned toward the door again. Bradley panicked. Wait. It was almost a plea. Keanu stopped again, but this time, he didn't turn. Bradley tried again, his voice an awkward mix of fake enthusiasm and pure desperation. If you're still interested, I'd be happy to. Not anymore. Keanu's response was so calm, so final, that it sucked the last bit of air from Bradley's lungs. A few seconds later, the door swung shut behind him. Silence. A heavy, suffocating silence. It was the kind of silence that burned, that made every second stretch unbearably long. Bradley could feel the eyes of everyone in the store boring into him. A cough. A sharp intake of breath. Then, a low, unimpressed voice from behind. Jesus, Bradley. Bradley turned stiffly. His manager, Margaret Sterling, stood a few feet away, arms crossed over her pristine navy blue blazer. Her expression was unreadable, but the sheer disappointment in her eyes made Bradley want to sink through the damn floor. Margaret exhaled, rubbing her temple. Tell me you didn't just dismiss Keanu Reeves like he was some guy off the street. Bradley tried to speak, but nothing came out. Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line. Congratulations, she muttered. You just made one of the biggest mistakes of your career. Margaret's words hit like a hammer, reverberating through Bradley's chest, making his pulse pound in his ears. His throat went dry as the weight of what had just happened settled in. He had dismissed Keanu Reeves, not just any customer, but one of the most well-respected, most admired, and, worst of all, most humble celebrities in the world. The store remained eerily silent, tension thick in the air. Bradley could feel the eyes of his co-workers, of the other customers, burning into him, each one carrying the same unspoken judgment. You screwed up. Margaret inhaled deeply, her sharp gaze locked onto him. Do you even understand the damage you've just done? She asked, her voice measured but carrying an unmistakable edge. This is Beverly Hills, Bradley. Do you know how fast news like this spreads? He swallowed, trying to steady himself. Margaret, I didn't. She cut him off with a single, sharp shake of her head. You didn't what? You didn't recognize one of the most famous men on the planet? Or you didn't think treating a potential customer like garbage might come back to bite you? His mouth opened, then closed. There was nothing he could say. Margaret sighed, rubbing her temple as though trying to ward off an oncoming headache. I'll deal with this later, she muttered. Then, more pointedly, for now, you need to pray that this doesn't get out. But it did. Not even an hour later, whispers turned to texts. Texts turned to posts. And posts turned into a full-blown wildfire on social media. Keanu walked down the busy streets of Pasadena, his hands tucked into his pockets, his mind still lingering on the encounter at Regency Timepieces. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even surprised. He had been through situations like that before, where people judged him based on what they saw instead of who he actually was. But still, it left a bitter taste in his mouth. He wasn't looking for anything extravagant. Just a watch. Something classic, something meaningful. And that's when he saw it. A small, unassuming storefront tucked between two larger, flashier buildings. The wooden sign above the door read Everett & Sons Watches, the paint slightly faded but still dignified. It was the kind of shop that had been around for decades, the kind of place built on passion rather than profit. Keanu stepped inside. A small bell chimed above the door, and immediately, the air changed. Warm. Welcoming. No sterile luxury. No manufactured exclusivity. Just timepieces and stories, displayed in wooden cases that showed their age in the best way possible. Behind the counter stood an older gentleman, his silver hair neatly combed back, round glasses perched on his nose. His name tag read Frank Everett. The man looked up, a friendly smile spreading across his face. Good afternoon, he greeted. What can I do for you today? Keanu returned the smile, immediately feeling the difference. I'm looking for something special, he said. Frank's eyes twinkled with curiosity. Special how? Keanu paused, considering his words. Something with history. Something that means more than just a price tag. Frank nodded, stepping out from behind the counter. Then you've come to the right place. He moved to a glass case near the back, pulling out a small, beautifully aged pocket watch. The metal was slightly worn, but polished with care. When Frank flipped it open, Keanu noticed an inscription on the inside. Tempus fugit, amor manet. Keanu traced his thumb over the words. Time flies, but love remains. Frank smiled knowingly. This belonged to a soldier in World War II. He carried it through the entire war, kept it with him every single day. After he passed, his grandson brought it here, said he wanted it to go to someone who'd appreciate it. Keanu exhaled, feeling something settle in his chest. This was it. This was the one. How much? He asked. Frank shook his head. It's not about the money. It's about finding the right owner. Keanu smiled. Then I'd like to take it. Back at Regency Timepieces, the disaster had fully erupted. By the time Margaret returned to her office, her phone was vibrating non-stop. Social media was ablaze. Someone had posted the encounter, word for word, and it had exploded. Keanu Reeves walked into Regency Timepieces today, dressed in jeans and a baseball cap, and they treated him like he didn't belong. Turns out, he just wanted to buy a watch. But instead, their employee judged him and basically told him to leave. Keanu, being Keanu, just walked out. Imagine rejecting one of the kindest, most humble celebrities alive just because he didn't look rich enough. The comments were brutal. Regency Timepieces just committed career suicide. Damn, imagine the kind of people they actually cater to if this is how they treat regular folks. Disgusting. Keanu Reeves could have bought the whole damn store if he wanted to, but they acted like he wasn't good enough for them. I hope this place goes out of business. Margaret groaned, tossing her phone onto her desk. Bradley, standing near the doorway, looked like a man awaiting execution. His tie was slightly loosened, his normally perfect posture slightly hunched. Margaret, You're fired. The words were flat. Cold. Final. Bradley flinched. Wait, what? Margaret turned, pinning him with a glare. I told you to pray this didn't get out. And now, thanks to you, this store's reputation is hanging by a thread. Regency Timepieces isn't just about luxury, Bradley, it's about status. And right now, we look like nothing more than a bunch of elitist assholes. He took a step forward, desperate now. Margaret, please, I didn't mean. She held up a hand. It doesn't matter. What matters is that Keanu Reeves is now a walking PR nightmare for us. This story is going to spread everywhere. And guess what? You're the villain in it. Bradley opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Margaret exhaled sharply. I want you out. Effective immediately. Bradley stared, a mix of shock and humiliation burning in his chest. Then, finally, he turned on his heel and walked out. Elsewhere, in the quiet of Everett and Sons watches, Keanu sat in a leather chair near the counter, turning the pocket watch over in his hands. It felt right. The weight of it, the history behind it. This was the kind of thing that mattered, not price, not exclusivity. Meaning. Frank handed him a small, velvet-lined case. Take good care of it. Keanu smiled, slipping the watch inside. I will. And as he stepped out onto the sidewalk, the world moved around him, fast-paced and frantic. But in his pocket, against his palm, time itself felt different. Because some things, the right things, weren't about money at all. 2 days later, the fallout had reached its peak. The story had spread like wildfire, reaching every corner of the internet. Articles popped up on major news sites, talk show hosts weighed in, and fans of Keanu Reeves flooded social media with praise for his humility and disgust for Regency Timepieces. The store had officially become the cautionary tale of elitism gone wrong. Margaret Sterling sat in her office, exhausted, scrolling through headline after headline. Luxury watch store snubs Keanu Reeves, and immediately regrets it. How Regency Timepieces ruined their reputation in one night. Keanu Reeves chooses small, family-owned watch shop over snobby high-end retailer. The worst part? It wasn't just bad press. Sales had plummeted. Calls from their most loyal clients had poured in, all asking the same thing, is it true? Did you really turn away Keanu Reeves? Some were polite about it. Others weren't. A few had outright cancelled their memberships. Margaret knew damage control was nearly impossible now. Meanwhile, Bradley Carter sat alone in a dimly lit bar on the other side of town, gripping a whiskey glass he hadn't even sipped from. His phone buzzed on the counter, notifications lighting up the screen, most of them unread. He had stopped checking after the first wave of texts. His dismissal had been swift, but the humiliation? That would last much longer. His name had been dragged through the mud in every major business circle in Beverly Hills. Every luxury retailer knew exactly what had happened. He had sent out desperate job applications, but the responses, if they even bothered replying, were polite rejections at best, radio silence at worst. No one wanted to hire the guy who had insulted Keanu Reeves. He exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. He had spent years perfecting his ability to read people, to know who was worth his time and who wasn't. And yet, in one careless moment, he had misread the one person who could have changed everything. A bitter laugh escaped him. He had been so sure of himself. So confident. Now. He was a cautionary tale. Somewhere across the city, in a much quieter corner of town, Keanu Reeves sat on a small wooden bench in a sunlit park, flipping open his new pocket watch. The old, engraved words gleamed softly in the light. Tempus fugit, amor manet. Time flies, but love remains. It had been years since he had worn a watch. In Hollywood, time was dictated by schedules, assistants, and endless calls. But this? This was different. He could feel the weight of it in his palm, the story behind it, the life it had before it ever reached him. The world outside moved at its usual breakneck speed, cars zipping by, pedestrians glued to their phones, conversations blending into background noise. But here, in this quiet moment, time felt still. He let out a slow breath, slipping the watch back into his pocket. For him, this wasn't about proving a point. It wasn't about revenge or rubbing his fortune in someone's face. He had just wanted a watch. A piece of time that mattered. And he had found it, not in the gleaming halls of a luxury boutique, but in the hands of a man who understood that value wasn't just in price tags. The world would keep talking. It always did. But for Keanu, the lesson was simple. True wealth was never about money. It was about how you choose to spend your time. And that? That was priceless.